Found insights everywhere. My name is Ben Munson. I'm a senior technology specialist here at FarmQA, and I'll be walking you through the webinar. So with that said, I am going to just touch very briefly on who we are. I do cover this in a little bit more detail in our previous webinar if you are interested. But we are a software company. We are based out of Fargo, North Dakota. We were incorporated in 2015 and have been building what we call digital tools for agronomy. And so we kind of unpack that in this webinar series. And today we're touching on the mobile side. A little bit more about us as a whole. We do cover currently 4 million acres, a little bit over that. Primarily in North America, we are doing some international business as well. You can see the pins represent the acreage covered in the region throughout North America. And we don't just stick to the row crops. We do actually have a wide array of different crops that we are working with. Our templates within our scouting forms are customizable enough that we can support different markets equally well within the software platform. So with that, I do want to spend most of the time on the live demo of the product. So we will jump over to a web view and I will speak through the mobile application. So with that said, and a few housekeeping items, if you do have questions along the way, feel free to type those in the chat and we will circle back to those at the end for a brief Q&A. Okay, with that said, the mobile application that I'm displaying now would run on an iOS, an Android device, a tablet, whatever form of technology that a user is taking to the field, we can support their needs. A few things to touch on there is the functionality is extremely similar between all platforms. Really, the only difference being is obviously the screen size is going to be a factor, and where that comes into play would be if you are on an iPad versus a phone view, you can get multiple columns within our templates, which I can show here in a minute. Regardless, the functionality on the mobile side is we would show your location, but then in addition, your field boundaries will be displayed colored by the crop. So as you zoom in here, you'll see the field names, the delineation of the boundaries. If you were to drive throughout your operation, you would see that green circle move throughout your region with the field boundaries projected. One thing to note along those lines within the app that is a nice feature is if you click on the bullseye icon on the right hand side here, and you can see how this turns solid, this will then keep your location centered in the screen as you drive. So imagine if you were to go west down this highway, you would keep that green dot centered without having to touch the phone, so you could actually be driving and seeing which boundaries or fields are next to you. Okay, continuing on, one thing to note that on this map view, we can see the boundaries and that they can either be brought in through an import process, or you can actually draw them either from a web view or the mobile application. To draw them on the application, we're going to click this blue plus button and then click the new field option. This is going to pull up a few draw tools or draw pane at the top of the screen. I'm going to select the polygon tool, and in this case we're just going to draw this small little trial plot. You can see how I'm clicking the corners to delineate the shape. If you did have something more complex, you actually can drag your mouse, and you can see here how I rounded that corner by doing so. A few other things to note, we do have a circle draw tool, so if you're dealing with circle pivots, you can use that tool instead. We can also further adjust this boundary, so if you draw a rough shape, you could then come in here and move these vertices if you wanted to get more details. In addition, I would note that as you click on the middle vertices, they will create more points for you to get additional detail with your field boundary. You can also see in the top right, we have an eraser icon, so if you do add additional vertices that you need to clear out, you can do that with the eraser icon by highlighting the vertice. Now, to finish out this process, we are going to give the field a name and some details. So in this case, I'm going to designate what crop is planted in this field. The plant date is optional, but you can key it in with a date picker. Same thing with the area. We will auto-calculate the shape or the size of the field rather by the delineation, but if you do know the exact size, you can key that in on this screen. The last thing that I will designate is I will select which farm this field is associated to within my organizational tree. Now, if I add this field, we'll see that that webinar field is now in my account, and I can immediately start scouting that field. So that is the draw feature. A few additional things to note on this map tab is that if we zoom out to the entire view of my operation, I would point out that with the slide out pane under these map options, I can toggle between my map providers. So that's Bing, Mapbox. I can choose to have a light or dark background as well. But the other thing to note is we can overlay, in this case, township section lines. And as I zoom in, you can see those sections, the townships, etc., get displayed in more detail as I drill in. As far as the grower tree goes that I talked about when creating the field, we can display that by clicking on the organization name at the top, and this will display the entire grower farm field tree that you've customized within your account. The value of this is that we can then select any given unit within that tree. I'm just going to clean up my overlays here to showcase this. Right now I'm showing my Minnesota farm location, which is just everything east of Fargo. But alternatively, I could select my North Dakota farm operation, and now I'm showing just those boundaries. So at any given time, a user can view the fields that they need to work on or scout for a given day. Okay, so that is the basics of the map that we offer. I would leave you with the statement that you can click on a field boundary to start inputting data, but I'm actually going to showcase from the Fields tab. So if we jump over to the Fields tab, this is where you can do a few things. By default, the list is sorted by distance, and this is where you're going to see the fields that are closest to you show up at the top. But as you can see here, we do have alternative sorting options. So I could, for example, sort this by crop, and you'd see this list essentially grouped by the different crops. Now, what I'm going to do here is I can search this based on a crop. I can search it based on a name, and each time it's snapping down to bring up that field, which would then allow me to scout. So I'm going to scout this field 38. What you're going to see here is I'm now in a field-specific view, meaning that everything I do going forward pertains to this field 38. I have the boundary displayed. The icon on the bottom left is the field entrance. What this allows me to do is if I click on that entrance icon, I can actually route to that entrance. So if you're on a mobile phone, this would pull up your location by default, and it would give you turn-by-turn directions in your default mapping application. Additionally, we can delineate that. So in my case, I already had the boundary shown, or sorry, the entrance shown. But if I click on these dot icons over here, I can take an action, one of those being to set my field entrance. So I can designate where that is on the mobile app, and then anybody else using the program can do the navigation feature. In addition, you probably noticed I have a few other actions within this view. So I can set plant harvest dates, and I can set the entrance from that view. At the bottom of the screen, you're going to see what's planted, the field size, when the field was last checked, or what the last report date. And then I can also view, if I click on this 16, I can view all of my previous scouting reports from this view. One of the most common use cases with that is I can click in this case, to my October 6th report, and I can get a view of what I scouted last time I was there. Okay, at this point, we'll talk through the actual scouting workflow. So we have the opportunity to turn on a map layer from this view. I'm going to pull up a demo field that has a few layers on it. And in this case, you can see I have a zone map which projects on the mobile application. I'm going to make this a little bigger. And this will allow you to see your location projected on top of the map layer, so you could scout certain zones, or alternatively, you could toggle on something like a yield map and you could scout different areas of the fields that yielded better or worse in previous years. So keep in mind that you can use map layers at any time, and it's different spatial data sets that you can bring in. We will be covering map layers in greater detail in a future webinar. Regardless, once you have found a location you want to scout, and perhaps you're physically standing there, you can use this blue plus button, which drops a pin using your phone's GPS. So it's going to geolocate you. You can now take an action at the bottom, which is add observations, or you can create a recommendation. If I add an observation, this brings us into the scouting workflow, where it pulls up the template I have designated for my cornfields. And in my case, I start with the summary section. I will say overall, the field looks good. And then we'll make a comment to add more details later. So this is something that you can type in the field, and I'm adding that additional note to showcase how we can edit these reports later on. One thing to note from this view is that we do support voice to text. So if you have a pickup secretary, or maybe you are just in the field and want to verbalize what you're seeing opposed to typing it out as for an efficiency factor, you can talk into the phone and we will auto-populate the text. Going through the template here on the top, you can see the different tabs that I have created in my template. I'm going to click on my yield question, and this happens to be a corn template, so you'll see things like ear width, ear length, but the concept here is this is a calculated question, meaning that there are multiple inputs and you'll get a single output. So in my case, I'm going to perhaps pull off 3 ears in a 17.5 foot row of corn, and I can enter the numeric values here for those 3 ears. Now I have a population count down here along with my kernels per bushel estimate, which can all be adjusted. But now when I back out, note that I will get a single output, which is 273 bushels based on my assessments. Something to note here is this is a question that can have repeaters, meaning that if I grab a fourth ear, I could add that 4th ear and I could add that to my assessment, or vice versa. I can remove ear counts and perhaps I just have 2 ears, which I'll input in this calculation question. So you can now see that this changes the calculation. Moving on to more of a simplistic input, if I click on the insect tab, you can now see a spider mite input, which in this case is going to be a simple key in from a keypad. But alternatively, you could choose to have a slider view for numeric inputs instead. Or the last data type here to showcase would be a pick list option, which you can see I've set this up to be a low, medium, high picker, but you can have unlimited options within that. The last thing to note that will come up when I talk about templates is we do have this note section or hint section, which says assess every 1/10 of an acre. So these are notes that an agronomist can type in, and the scouts will have that as a reference for when they check fields. Now from this screen, what I will do within this aphid question, if I click on these 3 vertical dots, this will allow me to take pictures, so I can do this in real time, or I can actually attach pictures from my photo library. So if you've taken pictures already, if I come back into this view, this will pull up, in my case on my computer, so it pulls up my desktop view, but I can also do this from my phone, which would pull up your phone library. I can also further designate where I saw aphids. So this is an interactive map where on the top I can use any of my draw tools to further delineate where I see aphids. This polygon tool is or can also be used as a freehand draw tool if you click and hold. And the last tool would be a line tool, which you can show a route that you walked in the field. All three of these will show up as attachments, and you can note that you can thumb through these as a reference, and then I can even trash can and remove individual pictures if you've perhaps got a better picture that you added. Now, if I continue on through this template, you can see the disease tab showcases back-to-back pick list options, which shows you kind of the efficiency of entering data in that format. The last thing I'll show is plant conditions, which does showcase a date picker. And then I would also point out that this is a numeric question, but the difference here is that I did set numeric ranges to 20 to 60,000, so you can delineate that as far as your boundaries. If I back out, what I'll showcase now is how we can do multiple assessments in a field. And if I click on a point in the north portion of the field, this is where I can come in and, for example, do a second aphid count. And this will be for the sake of the report, but I'll go in and now drop a third pin just to showcase what our averages look like, but perhaps this is maybe lower aphid pressure on the east half of the field. Okay, so now I've done a report with 3 assessments. Something to note within here is, let's say I've done a 4th assessment, and for whatever reason I do want to delete that or remove that 4th option. I can do that within this observation view, which is actually just simply a list view of all these observations. And at this point, I can click in any one of those and see my inputs for that point. But I can also swipe left and delete that entire observation point, which now I'm left with just the 3. I will also showcase how to write a recommendation simply for showcasing the output or the PDF view. We will go into much greater detail on this workflow next week in our webinar, but for the time being, I'm going to pick a mix, set a priority level, and some date ranges for this chemical recommendation, simply so it can accompany my scouting report. Okay, at this point in time, we are going to submit this report, and we're doing this by clicking the green checkbox. If we have connectivity, this will be sent out to the desktop. It will be sent out to any other users that have a login. They can see it on the mobile app immediately, perhaps if they're a grower seeing data from an agronomist, and I'll showcase how they can do that. So if you look on the bottom left, everything we've done so far has been within the Fields tab, but we're going to jump over to the Scouting tab, where you can see in progress reports. So these are things like drafts in your email, the reports that have been started but not submitted. If we look below that, we get to a past report section where these reports have actually been submitted and are accessible to anybody within the program. Within this view, we do have the option to break down the reports to view it by a specific grower or any one of our branches. We can also search. So if we want to see all the reports for field 38, typing 38 will show me that. The other thing that we can do is that we have a filter icon. So this green icon in the middle, if we click on that right now, or by default, we show just the reports that I've submitted as a user, but you can toggle that over to view all the reports either submitted this month or in the current growing season. So what that would provide us with is, if you had other scouts submitting reports in the same account, you would see them listed per report, and then you could filter by that scout or the person inputting data. The other thing to note here is that we can multi-select. So if you want to start to send reports out to a potential user, you can multi-select. You can send that to a single PDF. In my case, I'm going to start by showing you just a single PDF to start with. We pull up from the bottom of the screen PDF customization options. So from this view, we can do things like choose to show a recommendation first or last, meaning below the scouting content, or omit that altogether. We can choose our map type. This, in my case, is choosing to bring in a terrain with labels, which is essentially a satellite map versus a light, dark map, etc. I will bring in weather data with this report, and you can have a couple different options, standard or none. And then header options would be what's shown at the top. If you want the field name, the logo, etc., what order those are shown in, you can customize that. The landscape and page size are the last two options. One thing to note here is we will remember your preferences. So once you find a PDF export option that works best for you, it's going to use that option every time that you export going forward on this device. With that said, we're going to showcase what this option looks like. So I clicked Open as PDF, which is our option to view this report within your device, whether this is a phone or if it's on your computer. I had a layout option that I wanted to change here. So let me go back to Portrait. And now this will open a new PDF with that portrait instead of landscape. And then I'll be a better example to showcase here. So the other option that, as this is loading, that we're going to show in a minute here is we do have a share option. So if you want to, let's say, text this report out to a user, you can do that immediately from the phone. And so I have a YouTube video to showcase that I will show briefly. So from this view, what we have is I'm clicking on a field within our mobile app. Then I click on this 5 icon that I showed before, where this shows 5 reports. But from this view, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this most recent report. And then this is what I was trying to show is the share option. So this is the scenario where from a field, from the office, you're wanting to send this report out immediately to a colleague, to a grower. But this brings up the share panel that's defaulted on your phone or your device. I'm going to send this in a group message to some farm managers. And you can see once I send this out, they get a summary saying that our new report is available, but also a preview of that. Now, the actual input, the output that they will see is what you're seeing on this particular screen. So they get a view of, first of all, your logo can be uploaded. This was one of my header options, which I chose to be the farm-field information. You can see who scouted it and when. If we look below, there's the map view showing where we scouted. So there's a pin corresponding to the columns. I have my weather conditions included, so I can show things like my growing degree days, season precip total are all included. That summary text shows up above the scouting report. But you can see here if I did multiple assessments with an average column included. Now, as I mentioned, I wanted that recommendation included just to showcase what that looks like in the output. But you can see that here included on the second page, along with any of my pictures and my notations. So that is an output that a grower could see or internally. And the other thing to showcase here is now if I have, for example, 3 reports, I can still choose those same customization options with the addition of an option to suppress page breaks between the reports. But now when I generate this is going to be 4 scouting reports all combined into a single PDF, which can now be sent out to that grower. So page number 1 is a report I just showed you. Page number 2 goes into a second report, and so on and so forth. So that is a combined view of scouting reports in FarmQA. Okay, moving on from here, we'll touch briefly on a few of the settings that we have in the mobile application. One of the most common questions we get is if we have an offline mode. And this is where we get into that option. So within settings, you can see the offline mode. What that means is that you can work completely offline within the FarmQA mobile application. No connection is required. The functionality is essentially the same with the exception of 2 things. One is that you will not have a satellite background map, but the boundaries are displayed. Your location is still displayed. You can click on a field to scout. The list view will function just the same. And then the other thing to note is you can't submit offline. So that green checkbox is not visible. And what that will do is instead of submitting, it will actually save the reports to that in progress section. So now I've simulated going back online. And if I click on the scouting tab, I will have all my in progress reports sitting in this section where I can now select all and submit in bulk. And now I'll be looking at all those reports that I did offline will be pushed out simultaneously. So you can see that those have now jumped down into that past report section. Jumping over to the web view. So once we've submitted these reports, we can now view this within our portal, we call it controller. But if we click on the Scouting tab, we see all the reports listed in this particular table. We can break this down by any one of our organizational units. In this case, I'm going to break it down by North Dakota Farm. And this is where you see the 2 reports that I've submitted, one of those being in that in progress section. I can search this if I want to view all my reports for field 38 in the last 30 days. I can see that. The other thing to note is I can change this time window. So if I want to view reports for the previous 12 months, it will load up all those reports and the same searching functions available. I can also toggle between growing seasons. So if I want to have digital records of what I saw going back indefinitely, we have that option here. Clicking in to one of the reports, we see the details listed out from this view. So this is where we can see the data collected. On the right hand side, we do have an interactive map. So if you want to click on a pin location, we can see what information is associated to each column. We can click into the paperclip, which brings up our attachments, whether those are map drawings or pictures. We can also, from this view, do a similar multi-select. So this is where we could send a series of reports to either PDF, or a different unique export from the web view is we can go to Excel as well, with our options being observations as rows or observations per tab in that Excel export. But now, to provide you that view, this is going to be a report per row in that view, and you could, for example, select all reports going back for an entire season. But what this provides you is the columns representing the output from those scouting forms, and again, the rows actually being observation points. And so this would be an entire report with 3 observation points plus the average column here. So that is an export option for us. The other thing to note, going back into the view for a single report, is that we can edit this. So in my case, you saw that I had left kind of an opportunity to add more notes here. So I could say spray for aphids in the southwest corner, need to harvest soon. So you'll note that these, once I save this, we're going to see those new notes, but you can also jump between any one of your observation points. We could adjust our aphid questions, etc. So fully customizable outputs, and now we see that new text that I keyed in. We can also write a recommendation on top of this scouting report, which we'll cover more next week. And then we can export individual reports from this view. Once we filter down the report view, we can toggle between reports without jumping back to that table, meaning that you can essentially turn pages in a binder of reports by using these up and down arrows to see all the reports for one field or for one grower, for example. I talked about the template being customized. The way we do that is in the Scouting tab and Templates in the top left. And from here, I'm going to click into my corn template. But for example, I'll show you how you can remove questions. And then, for example, we could add a new question and choose our question type, whether that's numeric, text, pick list, etc. In my case, I'll do a pick list question, and we're going to add a new question for head moth, and we can put inputs for none, low, medium, high, severe, for example. Now I could reorder this question. I can actually duplicate the entire question and now name this something like spider mites, and I can reorder this question again. Note that I can move sections in here. I can add new sections by clicking the plus button, and then I can save the entire template. Once I do that, those changes are instantly available on the mobile application for any scouts that would be collecting data. So with that, that really wraps up the full scouting workflow. I'd love to open up to questions and address anything that anybody has for me at this time. And you can do so by going to your chat box within the Microsoft Teams window. So you can see from my slide here what that would look like on your end. But you can see the chat box. And like I said, I'll be taking any questions now. And while we wait, I can touch on a few other things if there's any questions coming in. But I did want to point out that from the map view, we can display where scouting reports have been collected on a global view. So what I've done here on the web views, I clicked on Maps tab, brought out my map details, and then I've turned on my scouting report tab. So the pins that you're now seeing represent all my scouting reports for whatever date period I have set within this map view. So in this case, it's 30 days. And what this allows me to do is I can see all of my reports, and I could sort this map down, filter the map down to cornfields, and I could see which cornfields I perhaps missed within this month. And then I could zoom in to see more details per report from this view as well. Okay, well, if there are no questions, and I'll check in here quickly to see if there are questions. But if there are no questions, we will adjourn for today. We'd love it if you could continue to watch our webinar series as we move through the product. And next week, we will be talking about our recommendation writing tools and what that all entails within FarmQA. So I will leave this on the screen so you can see the dates and times of those upcoming webinars. We appreciate you joining, and reach out at any time with questions. Thank you.